The autumn of 1943 descended upon Tulsa, Oklahoma, with an unusual silence that seemed to settle into the very bones of the city. September had arrived with its customary heat, yet something felt different that year, as if the air itself carried whispers of events yet to unfold. The war raged across distant oceans, but here in the heartland, another kind of darkness was preparing to make its presence known. In the modest Brookside neighborhood, where elm trees lined quiet streets and children played beneath porches adorned with patriotic bunting, the Whitmore family prepared for what should have been a joyous occasion. Margaret and Thomas Whitmore had built their life around routine and respectability, their two-story colonial home standing as a testament to American perseverance during wartime. The couple had married young, their love story beginning in the shadow of the Great Depression and continuing through the uncertainties of global conflict. Their twin daughters, Eleanor and Evelyn, born exactly 7 years prior on September 15th, represented hope incarnate in a world grown weary of loss. The girls possessed an ethereal quality that neighbors often remarked upon. Their pale blonde hair catching sunlight like spun gold, their identical blue eyes holding depths that seemed far too knowing for children of their tender age. The preparations for the twins' 7th birthday had begun weeks in advance, with Margaret carefully rationing sugar and flour to ensure a proper celebration despite wartime shortages. Thomas had secured special permission from his supervisor at the Douglas aircraft plant to leave work early, a rare concession that spoke to the importance of this particular day. The guest list remained modest, consisting primarily of neighborhood children and a handful of family friends. Yet the anticipation surrounding the event had grown to almost palpable proportions. Eleanor and Evelyn themselves seemed oddly subdued as their birthday approached, their usual chatter replaced by long periods of contemplative silence that unnerved their parents. The morning of September 15th dawned gray and overcast, unusual for Oklahoma in early autumn, with heavy clouds pressing down upon the city like a suffocating blanket. Margaret rose before sunrise to begin her preparations, her hands trembling slightly as she tied her apron strings, though she attributed her nervousness to the natural anxiety of hosting a party during such uncertain times. The twins appeared at the breakfast table already dressed in their matching blue dresses, handmade by their grandmother and saved specifically for this occasion. Their movements seemed synchronized in an almost unnatural way, as if they shared some silent communication that existed beyond the realm of ordinary understanding. Thomas departed for work with promises to return by noon, his final glimpse of his daughters showing them standing side by side at the front window, their small hands pressed against the glass as they watched his retreating figure. Margaret busied herself with last-minute preparations, hanging streamers in the living room and arranging borrowed chairs around the dining table. The birthday cake, a modest vanilla creation decorated with 7 carefully hoarded candles, sat proudly in the center of the kitchen counter. As the morning progressed, Margaret found herself glancing repeatedly at the clock, counting down the hours until the celebration would begin. The first guests began arriving at 12:30, children from the neighborhood clutching small wrapped gifts and wearing their Sunday best despite the weekday celebration. Eleanor and Evelyn greeted each arrival with polite smiles and practiced curtsies, their behavior exemplary yet somehow hollow, as if they were performing roles rather than expressing genuine emotion. Margaret noticed how the twins seemed to move as mirror images of each other, their gestures and expressions perfectly synchronized in a way that made several guests comment upon the uncanny similarity. The party proceeded according to plan, with games of pin the tail on the donkey and musical chairs, providing entertainment for the assembled children. As the afternoon wore on, an inexplicable tension began to permeate the gathering, though none of the adults could quite identify its source. The twins participated in their own party with mechanical precision, winning games through what appeared to be wordless coordination and sharing their gifts with an eerie kind of detachment. Several mothers exchanged worried glances, noting how Eleanor and Evelyn seemed to anticipate each other's movements before they occurred. The birthday cake was brought out with great ceremony, its 7 candles flickering in the dim afternoon light that filtered through increasingly heavy clouds. The moment arrived for the traditional birthday song, and the assembled guests raised their voices in celebration of the twins' 7th year of life. Eleanor and Evelyn stood side by side before their cake, their identical faces illuminated by candlelight, their expressions serene yet somehow distant. As the final notes of the song faded into silence, the twins leaned forward in perfect unison to blow out their candles. The flames extinguished with unusual suddenness, as if drawn away by some invisible force. And for a moment, the room stood in complete darkness. When Margaret quickly struck a match to relight the candles, both Eleanor and Evelyn had vanished without a trace. The chaos that followed would be remembered by witnesses for the remainder of their lives. A frantic search that began in confusion and escalated into full-scale panic within minutes. Thomas arrived home to find his house filled with neighbors and friends, all calling out his daughter's names while searching every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The twins' blue dresses were discovered neatly folded on their shared bed upstairs, as if carefully removed and placed there by unseen hands. No doors or windows showed signs of forced entry, and none of the guests recalled seeing the girls leave the room during those crucial moments of darkness. The Tulsa Police Department responded to the Whitmore residence within 20 minutes of Margaret's hysterical telephone call, their arrival marking the official beginning of what would become one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in Oklahoma history. Detective Raymond McBride, a veteran investigator with 15 years of experience, took charge of the scene with methodical precision that barely concealed his growing bewilderment. The complete absence of any logical explanation for the twins' disappearance challenged every investigative principle he had learned throughout his career. Initial interviews with party guests yielded nothing but confused accounts of the moments when the candles were extinguished, each witness offering slightly different versions of events that seemed to contradict rather than clarify the sequence of occurrences. The physical evidence proved equally mystifying, with no footprints leading away from the house, no disturbed earth in the garden, and no indication that anyone had climbed through windows or forced their way through doors. Detective McBride ordered a thorough search of the entire neighborhood, mobilizing both uniformed officers and civilian volunteers in an expanding grid pattern that extended several blocks in all directions. Bloodhounds brought from Oklahoma City showed initial interest in the twins' bedroom before losing the scent completely at the front door, their confusion matching that of their handlers. The dogs' inability to track beyond the house itself suggested that Eleanor and Evelyn had simply vanished from existence rather than departed through any conventional means. Thomas Whitmore proved to be an ideal witness from an investigative standpoint, his training as an aircraft mechanic having instilled in him an appreciation for precise detail and logical thinking. His account of the morning's events provided a clear timeline up until his departure for work, though he admitted to feeling an unusual sense of foreboding as he left his daughters that final time. Margaret's testimony proved more fragmented, her shock and grief making coherent recollection difficult, yet certain details emerged with startling clarity. She insisted that the twins had been behaving strangely for weeks preceding their birthday, speaking in whispers and spending long hours staring out their bedroom window as if waiting for something to arrive. The investigation expanded to include interviews with teachers from Brookside Elementary School, where Eleanor and Evelyn had been enrolled since the previous autumn. Their teacher, Miss Dorothy Hanson, described the twins as exceptional students who seemed to share an almost telepathic connection, often completing each other's sentences and demonstrating identical answers on tests and assignments. She had noted recent changes in their behavior, particularly their tendency to draw identical pictures during art class without apparently consulting each other. The drawings themselves, preserved in the school's files, depicted strange scenes of children standing in circles beneath starless skies, their faces turned upward as if in supplication to some unseen presence. Detective McBride's examination of the twins' bedroom revealed several disturbing elements that had been overlooked during the initial search. Hidden beneath Eleanor's mattress was a small leather journal filled with childish handwriting that documented strange dreams shared by both girls over the preceding months. The entries, written in alternating hands, described nocturnal visits from a figure they called the Birthday Man, who promised to take them to a place where they would never grow old. The final entry, dated September 14th, contained a single line written in both girls' handwriting simultaneously, "Tomorrow we go home." The implications of this discovery sent chills through even the most seasoned investigators. The search for Eleanor and Evelyn expanded beyond Tulsa city limits as federal authorities became involved, their interest piqued by the unusual circumstances surrounding the disappearance. FBI agent Sarah Chen arrived from Kansas City with a team of specialists trained in cases involving missing children, bringing with her resources and expertise that local law enforcement lacked. Her initial assessment of the evidence supported Detective McBride's growing suspicion that the case defied conventional explanation. Agent Chen ordered psychological evaluations of all witnesses, hoping to uncover repressed memories or details that might have been overlooked in the initial interviews. The media attention surrounding the case began modestly, with local newspapers running front-page stories about the missing twins and their mysterious disappearance. Radio broadcasts carried descriptions of Eleanor and Evelyn throughout the region, while photographs of their angelic faces appeared on telephone poles and in shop windows across Oklahoma. The story captured public imagination in a way that surprised even veteran journalists, perhaps because it seemed to embody every parent's worst nightmare during an already uncertain time. Letters poured in from across the country, some offering prayers and support, others claiming to have seen the twins in distant locations, and a disturbing few containing theories about supernatural involvement. As September faded into October with no trace of the missing girls, the investigation took on an increasingly desperate quality that reflected the growing desperation of their parents. Thomas had taken leave from his job at the aircraft plant, spending his days walking the streets of Tulsa and visiting every possible location where his daughters might have been taken. Margaret rarely left the house, maintaining a vigil by the telephone and preserving the twins' bedroom exactly as it had been found on that terrible afternoon. The birthday cake remained on the kitchen counter, its 7 candles never relit, serving as a stark reminder of the celebration that had ended in unthinkable loss. The first significant break in the case came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Gladys Morrison, an elderly neighbor who lived 3 houses down from the Whitmores and was known for her habit of observing neighborhood activities from her front porch. Initially dismissed as unreliable due to her advanced age and tendency toward gossip, Mrs. Morrison insisted that she had witnessed something unusual on the afternoon of September 15th. According to her account, she had observed a figure in dark clothing standing in the Whitmore's backyard during the birthday party, though when she looked again moments later, no one was there. Her description of the figure remained frustratingly vague, but her certainty about the timing corresponded exactly with the moment the twins had vanished. The investigation into Eleanor and Evelyn's disappearance took a disturbing turn when Detective McBride discovered that the Whitmore property had a history that stretched back far beyond the family's recent residence there. Records at the Tulsa County Courthouse revealed that the land had changed hands numerous times since the early 1900s, with several previous owners reporting unusual incidents involving children. The most significant discovery came in the form of a police report from 1923, documenting the disappearance of twin brothers aged 6, who had vanished from the exact same location during their birthday celebration. The parallels between the two cases were too striking to be coincidental, yet no connection between the families could be established. Further research into the property's history uncovered additional disturbing patterns that suggested a cycle of tragedy spanning decades. The original homestead had been built in 1889 by the Carmichael family, German immigrants who had arrived in Oklahoma during the land rush with hopes of establishing a prosperous farm. Their records, preserved in the archives of the Tulsa Historical Society, told a story of initial success followed by inexplicable hardship. Crops failed despite favorable weather. Livestock died without apparent cause, and the family's children began experiencing what the father described in his journal as visitations from shadow people who whispered promises of eternal childhood. The Carmichael family had abandoned their homestead in 1894 after their twin daughters disappeared on their 8th birthday, leaving behind only a hastily written note expressing their belief that the land itself was cursed. Subsequent owners of the property reported similar experiences. The Henderson family in 1901 lost their twin sons during a birthday party. The O'Sullivan family in 1912 reported the disappearance of twin daughters aged 7, and the Walsh family in 1923 suffered the loss documented in Detective McBride's recent discovery. Each incident followed an identical pattern: twin children vanishing during birthday celebrations, leaving behind no physical evidence of their departure. Agent Chen's psychological evaluations of the party guests had revealed a troubling consistency in their recollections that defied logical explanation. Despite their varying ages and backgrounds, multiple witnesses described experiencing a sudden feeling of overwhelming cold during the moments when the birthday candles were extinguished. Several children reported seeing shadow shapes moving along the walls during those crucial seconds of darkness, while adults spoke of hearing whispered voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The shared nature of these experiences suggested either mass hallucination or exposure to some phenomenon beyond current scientific understanding. The discovery of additional journals hidden throughout the Whitmore house provided further insight into the twins' final weeks, revealing a progressive transformation in their behavior that their parents had either failed to notice or chosen to ignore. Eleanor's writings described increasingly vivid dreams in which she and her sister were summoned to join other children in a place beyond the veil of ordinary sight. Evelyn's contributions to the shared journal took on a different tone, focusing on instructions received from their mysterious visitor about preparations necessary for their departure. The final entries suggested that the twins had been actively collaborating in their own disappearance, following some predetermined plan that they believed would lead to a better existence. The investigation expanded to include consultation with experts in folklore and unexplained phenomena. Though Detective McBride approached such resources with considerable skepticism, Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, a professor of anthropology at the University of Oklahoma, provided historical context for similar cases documented across various cultures throughout human history. Her research identified recurring patterns of child disappearances associated with specific locations, often involving twins or siblings and occurring during significant dates such as birthdays. Dr. Thornton's theories about temporal weak points and interdimensional bleeding sounded like science fiction to most investigators, yet her academic credentials demanded serious consideration. The psychological toll of the extended investigation began to manifest in disturbing ways among all participants, from family members to law enforcement personnel. Thomas Whitmore's methodical nature had given way to obsessive behavior, spending entire nights walking the streets of Tulsa while calling out his daughters' names to empty air. Margaret had begun experiencing vivid dreams in which she could hear Eleanor and Evelyn calling to her from somewhere just beyond her reach, their voices growing fainter with each passing night. Detective McBride found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about reality that had guided his entire career, while Agent Chen reported experiencing unexplained phenomena during her visits to the Whitmore property. The case attracted attention from researchers investigating similar disappearances across the United States, revealing a network of connected incidents that had previously been dismissed as isolated tragedies. Dr. Marcus Webb, a private investigator specializing in unusual missing persons cases, arrived in Tulsa with files documenting over 30 incidents involving twins or multiple siblings vanishing under circumstances that defied conventional explanation. His research suggested the existence of what he termed collection points, specific locations where the barrier between our world and something else had grown thin enough to permit crossover. The Whitmore property appeared to be one such location, its tragic history spanning generations of inexplicable loss. As winter approached and the investigation entered its third month, public interest in the case began to wane despite the continued efforts of law enforcement and volunteers. The initial flood of tips and reported sightings had dwindled to a trickle, with most leads proving to be cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking. The media moved on to other stories, though a dedicated group of supporters continued to distribute flyers bearing the twins, photographs and information about their disappearance. The Whitmore family found themselves increasingly isolated, their tragedy becoming an uncomfortable reminder of life's fundamental unpredictability that neighbors preferred to avoid. The most disturbing development occurred during the first week of December, when several residents of the Brookside neighborhood reported hearing children's laughter emanating from the empty Whitmore house during the late evening hours. Police investigations found no evidence of intrusion, yet the reports continued with disturbing regularity. Mrs. Morrison claimed to have observed lights moving through the upstairs windows, despite the family's continued absence, while other neighbors spoke of glimpsing small figures playing in the backyard beneath the winter moon. These accounts were dismissed as products of grief and suggestion, yet their consistency troubled even the most skeptical investigators. The revelation that would forever change the nature of the investigation came from an unexpected source, Eleanor and Evelyn themselves, or rather, from what remained of their presence in a world that could no longer contain them. On the night of December 21st, the winter solstice, Margaret Whitmore was awakened by the sound of familiar voices calling her name from the twins' bedroom. Following the sounds through her darkened house, she discovered her daughter's room filled with an otherworldly light that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. Eleanor and Evelyn appeared as translucent figures standing beside their bed, their forms flickering like candle flames in a gentle breeze. The message they conveyed to their mother during those precious moments transcended ordinary communication, arriving as pure understanding rather than spoken words. The twins explained that they had not been taken against their will, but had chosen to accept an invitation extended to special children throughout history. They existed now in a realm where time moved differently, where birthday celebrations continued eternally, and where the innocence of childhood could never be corrupted by the harsh realities of adult existence. Their disappearance had been a graduation rather than an abduction, a transition to a state of being that offered protection from the pain and loss that defined mortal experience. Margaret's account of this encounter, related to Detective McBride the following morning, challenged every assumption about the nature of the investigation and the fate of the missing twins. The detective's initial skepticism gave way to stunned silence as Margaret described details about her daughter's current existence that seemed to explain many of the case's most puzzling elements. The synchronized behavior, the shared dreams, the mysterious journal entries all took on new meaning when viewed as preparation for a journey to a dimension where such connections represented normal rather than exceptional circumstances. The birthday candles had served as a beacon, their extinguishment marking the moment when the barrier between worlds had grown thin enough to permit passage. The decision of whether to share this information with the public proved to be one of the most difficult ethical dilemmas faced by law enforcement officials throughout their careers. Agent Chen consulted with FBI psychologists and supervisors, ultimately concluding that Margaret's account represented either a breakthrough in understanding unexplained phenomena or the manifestations of a grief-stricken mind unable to accept her children's likely death. The official investigation would continue to pursue conventional explanations, while privately acknowledging that the case had moved beyond the realm of normal police work. The files would remain open indefinitely, though active pursuit of leads would be scaled back as resources were redirected to more solvable cases. Dr. Thornton's analysis of Margaret's account provided academic validation for theories that most scholars refused to consider seriously. Her research into historical records revealed numerous instances of similar visitations reported by parents of disappeared children, testimonies that had been dismissed as products of psychological trauma rather than genuine supernatural communication. The consistency of these accounts across cultures and centuries suggested either a shared delusion rooted in human psychology or evidence of phenomena that science had yet to acknowledge. Dr. Thornton's published papers on the subject would eventually establish her reputation as a pioneer in the field of interdimensional research, though academic acceptance of her theories remained limited. The Whitmore house was quietly sold in the spring of 1944, its tragic history disclosed to potential buyers as required by law, but attracting little interest from conventional families. The eventual purchaser was Dr. Webb, the private investigator who had documented similar cases across the country. His intentions involved establishing a research center dedicated to studying the phenomenon of dimensional crossings, using the property as a base for investigations into related disappearances. The house itself seemed to welcome this change in purpose, with workers reporting an atmosphere of peaceful anticipation rather than the oppressive sadness that had characterized the location since the twins' disappearance. Thomas and Margaret Whitmore relocated to California, where Thomas found employment in the growing aerospace industry, and Margaret attempted to rebuild their lives away from the constant reminders of their loss. Their marriage survived the tragedy, though it was forever changed by knowledge that transcended ordinary human experience. Margaret continued to receive periodic visitations from Eleanor and Evelyn, brief encounters that provided comfort while serving as reminders of the thin boundary between what is known and what remains beyond understanding. These experiences were shared only with her husband and a small circle of trusted friends who had witnessed the investigation's most unusual aspects. The official case files of Eleanor and Evelyn Whitmore's disappearance remained classified for decades, their contents deemed too sensitive for public release by authorities who understood the potential for mass panic if the truth were widely known. Detective McBride continued his career in law enforcement, but never forgot the case that had challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. His private notes, discovered after his death in 1978, revealed a man whose worldview had been permanently altered by exposure to phenomena that existed beyond the boundaries of accepted scientific knowledge. He had continued investigating similar cases throughout his career, accumulating evidence of a pattern that stretched across the continent and throughout recorded history. The Brookside neighborhood slowly recovered from the trauma of the twins' disappearance, though the empty lot where the Whitmore house had stood served as a permanent reminder of the mystery that had touched their community. Children playing in the area occasionally reported glimpsing figures in matching blue dresses among the trees, while adults sometimes heard the faint sound of birthday songs carried on the evening breeze. These experiences were generally dismissed as tricks of imagination or light, yet their persistence over the years suggested something more substantial than mere memory or wishful thinking. The truth about Eleanor and Evelyn Whitmore's fate remained a matter of interpretation rather than established fact, leaving each observer to draw their own conclusions about the nature of reality and the possibilities that existed beyond conventional understanding. Their story became part of Tulsa's unofficial folklore, passed down through generations as either a cautionary tale about the dangers that lurked in familiar places or as evidence that love could transcend even the boundaries between dimensions. The twins themselves, according to those who claimed to have encountered them, seemed content with their choice, their eternal childhood a prize worth the sacrifice of ordinary existence in a world grown dark with war and uncertainty. The final entry in the case files came from Agent Chen, who had continued monitoring the situation long after her official involvement ended. Her report, dated September 15, 1953, noted that exactly 10 years after the twins' disappearance, several residents of the former Brookside neighborhood reported simultaneous dreams in which Eleanor and Evelyn appeared to thank them for their kindness during the investigation. The twins had aged not at all during the intervening decade, their 7-year-old faces unchanged by the passage of time that had marked everyone else who remembered them. They conveyed a message of gratitude and peace, suggesting that their choice had been correct and that others should not mourn their departure, but rather celebrate their escape from a world that offered children so little protection from its cruelties. This final contact marked the end of active supernatural manifestations associated with the case, though the memory of Eleanor and Evelyn Whitmore continued to influence all who had known them. Their disappearance had opened a window into possibilities that most people preferred to keep closed, revealing aspects of existence that challenged comfortable assumptions about the nature of life and death. The twins had chosen to step through that window into whatever lay beyond, leaving behind only questions that could never be fully answered and a legacy that would forever mark September 15th as a date when the impossible had briefly become possible in one small corner of Oklahoma.